Welcome, everybody. We have an exciting webinar for you today to discuss the positive impact of venture investing, hosted by VC Lab, and our special guest is Christine Herron. So I see people are streaming in. Thank you for your patience. We were just dealing with some technical issues, and I see we're already at 73, 76. That's great. So let me just quickly introduce VC Lab, give people a moment to come in, and then we'll get right into the topic. Before I even introduce VC Lab, and I'll say this a few times because we're already at 92, we are going to be responding to audience feedback and audience questions. So if you have a question that you'd like us to get on stage, so to speak, there's a Q&A area. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Click that button, it will pop something up. You can ask a question and then you can upvote questions. So we're going to definitely get through the highest voted questions. So make sure to ask your question and vote up questions that you want to see answered. Let me quickly introduce VC Lab. My name is Adeo Ressi. I am CEO of the Founder Institute and CEO of VC Lab. VC Lab is a venture capital firm accelerator. So we work with aspiring general partners, people that want to launch a venture capital firm, and we put them through a roughly 4-month structured program to launch a venture capital firm. It turns out that this program is working rather well. So in general, in the world today, if you want to launch a venture capital firm, it's taking somewhere around 9, 12, 18, or 24 months. I would say if you can do it really quickly, you can get it done in 9 months. If you're kind of average, you're in the 18-month range. And if you're slow, you're in the 24-month range. VC Lab graduate funds, and we have 42 funds that have graduated the program. The average time to their first close is just 6 months. So we've dramatically sped up the amount of time that it takes to get to your first close from a minimum of 9 months in the real world, probably 12 to 18 months more practically, down to just 6 months. And we do that by helping you sequence the decisions that you need to make so you're not wasting time doing things that don't matter. And we'll be talking a lot about launching a venture capital firm today. So we're already over 100 participants, which is great. So we'll jump into the topic at hand. So if you haven't done so yet, please apply to VC Lab if you're interested in starting a venture fund, and share out anything about today or VC Lab, because we're really trying to change the venture capital community by opening it up to amazing people around the world who want to launch VC firms, which brings us to our guest today. So I am very, very excited to be joined by Christine Herron. She's traveling, so even better that she's able to join. Christine is a real leader in both, well, diversity and impact in the venture world, two areas that we care deeply about at VC Lab. And her career spans pretty much all facets of the venture community. She's advised accelerators like StartX and 500. She's worked at corporate venture capital like Intel Capital, and she's worked at actual kind of early stage venture capital as well, including first round capital. And that gives her this amazing purview of the entire industry. And before, I've been talking a lot right now. So do you want to add anything to your intro, Christine, before we jump into some questions?
No, I think, well, the one thing I think I would add, especially given the topic that you've proposed for today around having impact, is I did also join Omidyar Network, which, if you guys are not familiar, is the eBay founders investment group, or now it's one of many, but at the time it was just Pierre Omidyar's first foray into doing impact-based venture or mission-based venture. And so that certainly was an interesting transition from a very typical Series A fund, which was the most recent thing I had done before that in venture.
Yeah, and Omidyar is truly impact. I think all they care about is impact, if that's correct.
Well, that depends on, sort of, I think that goes back to, I think a comment that I made, with you earlier about how, pretty much every investor has the opportunity to be an impact investor. Impact does not mean you're not out to make money. You can 100% want to make money, and also 100%, want to see good things happen in the world, and or to have some mindfulness about where you do and don't, place your cash once you have some.
So you've seen it all, right? You've seen all facets of the venture world, which is really unique, honestly. You can get people who have a lot of corporate experience, a lot of VC experience, but they don't have that range of perspective. And so maybe the first question I would ask is, what excites you the most and frustrates you the most with what's happening in venture today?
Yeah, I think what excites, and I thought about this a bit because I'm like, gosh, am I excited? Like, what am I excited about? And one of the things that excites me, and this is going to sound really, odd perhaps, is I'm excited to see a lot of people willing to fail in venture. It's funny because we talk about people failing in entrepreneurship constantly. We talk about how it's important to have a culture where it's okay to fail. It's okay to try something new, take a risk. If it doesn't work out, you take a lesson, you move to the next thing. And, some of that culture is finally bleeding into the venture community with emerging managers, where emerging managers are coming along and saying, you know what, I'm okay, trying something new. And whether that is my LP base, whether that is the way I'm going to source my deals, the way I'm going to, target my investments. So for example, and I don't know, how many folks may already be familiar with this, but so one of the ways Backstage Capital with Arlen Hamilton, who I think, very well known, and perhaps less well known, is how Arlen actually managed to support getting off the ground. She managed to support all of those efforts, all of those, offices in different cities where they wanted to, get entrepreneurship started, by selling off some of her own, carried interest. Right. And so for years and years and years, people have always been told, oh, don't ever sell your carried interest. It communicates to your LPs that you don't really believe in what you're doing. And I look at that, and I think a lot of people who, start from scratch and, bootstrap their way up is like, yeah, sometimes you do, you sell the furniture in the house so you can build the house. No point in having furniture with no house. So I really liked that, she tried something new. Now, they went a little too far with some of the expansion on that, had to retract it a little bit, but still there's no way she would have created the awareness, that center of gravity to get people into the space without taking a risk and trying something new that everyone has said for years, no, you can't do that. That's a terrible thing for people to do. So I think things like that get me excited, because I think doing things and getting started the exact same way is going to produce the exact same results in terms of who's starting a fund, what types of companies are they funding. Like, you start the same, you end the same. Something has to change very early. So I think that's exciting. And I think frustrating.
Many things.
Yeah. So many choices. I think the thing that's probably most frustrating is how seeing long established venture capitalists, the ones that already have a platform, and it's a very comfortable platform, it's a very high platform for some of them, seeing some of those people really not put their money where their mouth is, to say nice things, to say the correct things, but you don't necessarily see changes in how they take money, how they spend money, how they hire, how they promote, how they cultivate staff, how they invest in, not in terms of just cash, but also in terms of, correct management, leadership, coaching into, their founders. So I think wanting to see more come through, I think that, Mark Schuster, for example, is amazing. He has actually put his money where his mouth is. Like, he does all of the right things. I would love to see more people sort of follow that model of venture managing.
So you say you think they're saying the right things, but then if you actually look at what they're doing, a lot of the times they're saying and doing don't add up.
Yeah, and so, and I don't mind, I will say the thing that, in theory is personally revealing, but really is not a surprise. So I've certainly had those calls, back when I was leaving Intel. I was like, oh, am I going to go right back when I take a break, right? And you would take these calls and you'd have like that initial meeting, and you would know that I am being met with so that someone can check the box on their little Rooney Rule list that says I met at least 2 diverse candidates before I hired for this position. It's like, okay, so why am I here? I'm not a tire. Do not kick me. I don't enjoy it. So I think that's, so people are starting to do some of those practices, or they say they want diversity. And so, if we're speaking about, sort of hiring in a fund, and so they will bring in someone who's, underrepresented, ethnically, or who's female, or, fill in the blank from any of those, underrepresented groups. But then when you look at, sort of the background of that person, where they've worked, what they've done, it's really not that different. And again, I think, a recent exception, Andreessen Horowitz just brought in another partner who does not have the typical background. He's, did not go to Harvard Business School. He did not go start a company, coming out of college and, build it up and sell it, some big thing. He, is someone who hustles and like gets in and learn the business. And it's like, yeah, this is someone who doesn't have like the right background, but is the right guy. So I think, again, more of that is fantastic.
That's great. And questions are coming in, and just for people who ask questions, it's in the Q&A section, and make sure, try and keep them like concise and easy to read, because we'll try and get to them and upvote them. Okay, but I'm going to go through some questions first with you that I know are important and people want to know. So, okay, you kind of hinted at this. Venture capital is pretty male dominated, has been for a long time. It's been something you and I have talked about before. How do we change that? How does this change? The time has come for change, and do you have ideas on how we can bring more women into the field?
Yeah. I think in order for it to change, and this is why it's been so difficult, it really is that bringing in not just, diverse body parts, but actually diverse perspective. And so if you're basically looking for the same perspective with different body parts, you're not really going to change very much, because the pool is going to be a different pool than if you say, okay, we actually want real diversity. We want those different perspectives. Those different cultural styles, different ways of speaking and sort of exploring ideas or taking problems apart. When you do that, I think getting comfortable with those issues is really what it's going to take to get the doors open and valuing, different kinds of people at the table. And that is very hard to do. It is very hard to intentionally take your business, assuming you're a successful partner. It's very difficult to take your business that you've become comfortable in and say, you know what, I want to be uncomfortable. I want to get comfortable with being uncomfortable so that I can change, sort of what I see when I look around the room, what I see when I look at the portfolio, et cetera.
And isn't venture kind of an uncomfortable business? I mean,
you would think so. And this is, I can only speak from my own experience, but I know in, I'll use COVID as an example that, and hopefully is not overly polarizing, well, I know you probably like polarizing, so I'm a little provocative. So I don't know, it might be a mistake. So for example, there were, things that I would do that were risky during COVID, so I opened my house up. I had all these kids coming in, did the learning pod, so now I'm exposed to these other kids' families. And so since I took that risk, I reduced other risk. It's like, well, I can't have it all be risky. I've got to kind of balance it out so that my viral load stays, not too bad. So I didn't get haircuts. I'm still rocking my pandemic haircut.
Me too.
Yeah, I was sitting here, I'm like, oh man, I gotta go ponytail. I didn't go out, to the movies, even though they had some capacity, right? So I did, I took it down so I could take it up. And so I think when you look in, some of these venture businesses, it is so freaking risky. You're constantly trying to please, placate, keep happy your limited partners. The number one thing that you can do to make a limited partner happy is, to make them money, right? The number two thing you can do is make them look good, right? But the challenge is the way LPs get funded is not necessarily by taking risk. They get funded, or they get paid on a salary. They get paid on not losing money and just sort of keeping it going. And so there's this challenge of like, okay, how do I take a bunch of risks that might be scary while still, keeping these folks happy and making them feel like it's going to be a predictable set of returns, right? So that they continue to get paid, so their endowment continues to grow and takes care of their community. There's a lot of tension in those things you're trying to do. And so I think a lot of organizations, investment organizations, end up being a little more conservative. They end up being more conservative internally because they're being so much riskier externally, and they're putting, in fact, the more dollars are at risk, the more likely it is that they're going to be more conservative internally. If you look at, sort of the more private equity style funds, or the ones that are doing very, very late stage venture, those tend to be pretty white shoe.
Yeah.
Those are not the ones that are, taking big risks on people, with the wrong backgrounds, or, that, don't belong to the right club, or that, don't speak the right language, don't have the right slang, the right accent. People who are slow talkers instead of fast talkers, whatever it is.
Well, so can I just dive in on that for one sec? So,
Yeah.
so you're talking about within versus without, and to some extent, when we look at a VC lab, is like maybe we can't change it from within, because to your point, it's kind of so closed and conservative and trying. I think you nailed it, right?
And I think that conservatism is not just, I think a lot of people, when I use that language, I think a lot of people may associate that with, sort of an older demographic, an older white male demographic. And that's absolutely true at younger male demographics, younger white demographics as well. It's not just, people who are, 65 years old, it's all the way up in between. It's the 25-year-olds who went to Stanford and, got hot and started a fund. It's them too,
Right. And by the way, and to your point, they then look for women that are like them, right? Not necessarily women that are different or minorities or whatever. Everyone's looking, because it's so risky in the world, they want similar mindset, not different mindset, right?
Yeah, you want your whoopee, life is scary.
Well, but it's interesting because we had Steve Jurvetson on one of these, and he's partnered with a woman in his new fund, Future Ventures, and he likes the fact that she has a very different viewpoint, and he doesn't even want them to agree on deals. He likes the fact that they disagree on deals, and he was and so. I'd love to hear, like, do you think it can be changed from within, or do we need to change it from without? Do we need to start?
Well, I would argue that that is not necessarily changing it from within, because that's a new partnership.
Yeah, that's exactly. That's changing.
So
It's literally like
I would
what, a
argue
year
that
old?
that is exactly proving your point about, if you do want to change it, you have to sort of, scrap it, start fresh, do something new. And again, it goes back to what I'm excited about, which is the people who are new, coming in, starting it from scratch. I mean, I know that, one of the reasons I think that I've had my random walk survey course of venture capital is because there were challenges in all of those things. So for example, if you're doing corporate investing, it's incredibly challenging to have, every 12 months, you've got a new set of mandates that may or may not match up to the investments you've been making that 12 months. And then, the cycle kind of goes and goes when it does not match to, these long-term cycles of venture, right? So that's a challenge. And then you've got challenges in, sort of typical Silicon Valley, the kind of cronyism stuff that we were just talking about, being female, probably not using the right language half of the time. I'm always, my feet, I didn't think they were too big to fit in my mouth. I got them in there. They're always so I'm always in trouble. Maybe not as much as Deo, but I'm always in trouble.
Being in trouble is good. I mean, to your point, we need to blow this industry up a little bit and bring some new perspectives in and change the way things are done, right? And then we can have a positive impact on the world. I want to get to a lot of, there's so great, guys. Thank you so much for questions. Upvote the questions. Let's do some more internal, like one or two more internal questions, and then I'm going to start speeding through these questions that are coming up. Take a moment to vote on them. So what you mentioned some long-standing negative aspects of VC culture in our prep for this, and what are some of those things that you say right now I want to get rid of? If there were maybe top 3, top 1,
Yeah. I would love to get rid of and people, I say cronyism, saying like, wow, that sounds like such a harsh, like mafia mobster kind of word, the cronies, at City Hall.
Yeah.
But I'm like, but actually, yeah, cronyism. I would love to get rid of that. I would love to make it easier to find funders. And that's why I think, frankly, one of the most fantastic things you're doing at VC Lab, when you were first telling me about it, was freaking make it easy to find LPs, because most other VC, the way that people had always been saying, well, this is how you find, your LP, is you find another VC who's kind of willing to kind of like vouch for you, right? And they're willing to like let you, but otherwise they're like, oh no, like they're very jealous of their LP relationships. They don't share those. So never. So, unless they're willing to vouch with the family.
So cronyism is one thing to get rid of, and opening up.
Thing, because that's accessibility. That's the, they're gatekeeping, but they're not setting the tone. And this kind of goes back to, how many of these folks that talk about, oh, we want diversity and we just hired a female partner. And like, how many of them are going to emerging female managers and introducing them to their LP base? Probably not so many.
All right, what's another big one you want to see?
So gatekeepers not setting the tone, and I include not only the extent that there are GPs that are gatekeeping to the LPs, but also the LPs, right? To despite all of this hand waving in the community, you do not see the LP community moving towards mandates internally. You don't see them saying, hey, you know what, we're going to pull out of South Africa during apartheid. You don't see them saying, hey, we're going to pull out of tobacco in this situation. You see them saying, oh yeah, it'd be wonderful to see more diversity, but not actually putting a mandate in. So I'd love to see that change. Right? Again, money where your mouth is. And I think that, this was an issue during the bubble. I think it was another issue, maybe the last, maybe not last year, but the 10 years before that. Sort of this people just chasing, the latest shiny thing that kind of looks and smells the same, with the same kind of people doing it. Because again, sort of wanting to see diversity in the market isn't just about the types of founders or the type, it's also the and, sort of everyone looking and saying, hey, we need to be built just like Uber. We need to be built just like Airbnb. It's like, how many times you go to like a YC demo day and it's, oh, we're Uber for, we're Airbnb. Like, it was a joke. What's the thing everyone's going to be for this year? Right. So I'd love to see less of that. I'd love to see, if people are going to grow their funds in the venture community, and, it's hard to not let success, take you up. So if you are going to let success take you up, and you are going to increase your fund size, and so you can increase your management fee and all these other things that in theory come with doing well, try to keep the risk appetite the same. I'd love to see, like, that's a negative thing, is people actually, they take it down, which doesn't necessarily mean they're making better investments. It just means they're not working as hard to find the newest, riskiest, most innovative thing that might actually make that big impact, that might actually be long lasting. They're just doing all this Me Too crap.
So before I go into the next question, can I just double click on that for a minute? So do you, I love, that's an interesting view that I haven't heard anyone say before. You think that the venture community has actually had its risk go down lately, especially the bigger guys? I would agree with that statement now that you say that, but it's interesting. Well,
and again, not risk in terms of actual financial return risk. I don't think that has changed at all. It's that, again, it's sort of that seeking comfort, right? Seeking the familiar. I guess familiar is another comfort, right? So I think they seek the familiar. They say, okay, here's someone who looks correct, smells correct, is in the correct space. It says AI, it says AI, and it's like Uber, and it's a dude from Stanford. Oh, let's go. Right? So,
it's got the three things: AI, dude.
I'm all over it, right? So
skills like Uber.
And so,
well, then you look at Calendly.
That could be a very risky deal. I'm sure it would be a very risky deal, but there's this, it's going back to that, thing where you have at the LP level. And again, I think many people have heard the anecdote about, you don't get fired for buying Coca-Cola, right? Or buying IBM. You don't get fired for buying IBM stock. It's like, okay, I don't get fired for investing in the Stanford AI, Uber deal.
Yeah.
It's like, it seemed like it should be good. If they fail, I'm not in trouble. So yes, less risky.
All right, so let's take that to one other thing we talked about before, like, and then we have now lots and lots of questions. They're going to be fun, so we'll try and burn through them. We're getting ready, so vote now on questions you want answered, because that's coming next. But how can individual venture capitalists be more mindful about their investing? So we got a lot of people who are hopefully going to be starting venture capital firms listening right now. What, like, sage advice on being more mindful?
Yeah, that is the question, I think, because again, as you and I spoke about, I think you can be impactful without having an impact fund. Right? Like, it is not necessary to have an impact fund to be impactful. Your business practices make you impactful. Saying, and this is, a small thing, but for example, if you are writing a check to a new company, you send them that list of due diligence questions, like, okay, here's all the materials that we need from you, just including on the list, what's your diversity, equity, and inclusion policy? We need a copy of that, right? Like, I want a copy of that policy, and you put it right on the list right next to what's your boilerplate employment agreement, what's your blah, blah, blah. Like, it's not a lot of work to sort of subtly do these things. It's not a lot of work to, make sure that when you're on the board of a company, they are using hiring band, sort of salary bands in their hiring practices as versus negotiating one by one, and make them narrow salary bands. It doesn't, salary and equity bands. So that you don't get a big delta in between, diverse employees and, white male employees. Say, put in there, like, how often do you, review, everyone's salary to make sure that you don't have any inequities. It's not hard to just ask the questions that make people think, right? And so if you can just remember right up front, set the tone. I'm going to ask the questions that make people think. in many ways, I think if everyone were doing that, that would be far more impactful than any, X% increase in the number of female venture capitalists. Or on the other side, if you have invested in, women, Black entrepreneurs, anyone again from the less represented, groups, are you recognizing challenges they might make and making sure that they're getting the support they need? Because again, I think this goes back to being less risky and doing some cookie cutter on your investing, because it's easy to support the same white man again and again and again with the same educational background. You know what that person needs. There might be some little bits in here and there, but they generally need the same support. They don't have, issues that you're not familiar with. If you're going to invest in different types of people, you are going to have to deal with different issues on their behalf. You are going to need to support them through those issues. And so I think the mindfulness about always asking those impactful questions, and I think that mindfulness about, hey, what does this entrepreneur need from me? What does this team need from me to be successful? Doing that little bit of work, I think just those two things, hugely impactful. I think having an impact-based fund is on top of that. I'd much rather, if I had to choose, I would take everyone being mindful over a few being impactful.
That's a beautiful thought. All right, let's jump into questions from the audience because we have so many. Thanks everybody for doing that, and don't be shy. Okay, so Martin's asking, and this is a great question, what advice would you give an aspiring GP that doesn't have deep VC experience but has good sector knowledge? And I think that's probably what we see now, the most common new VC coming in. They have, because guys and girls, there's only a few thousand VC firms worldwide, 4 that are active, maybe 5,000, and maybe 15 to 20,000 active VCs in the entire planet. Mm-hmm. So of course you don't have VC experience, right? Okay. So what advice would you give?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you what advice people are often given, which I don't necessarily agree with, because I think it assumes a lot, which is to start making angel investments, right? That's what everyone says. Oh, you start making angel investments, and then once you've got an angel track record, you can sort of wrap that up and say, well, if I'd had a fund, this would have been my return, right? And so that's the advice I hear a lot of people get, and I know, that can be a little frustrating if you're not like, ready to go with your own personal dollars. A lot of people have the great background, but don't have the dollars to go out and write the angel checks. So I think that's, kind of the right thing that you can do. And this is, again, where the cronyism is frustrating, is you have to go start spending time. And so if you're saying that you want to invest, but you haven't invested yet, I think that the question I would ask yourself is, well, why do you think investing is something you want to do? Why do you think that is something you'd be good at? And not because, you fit some checklist somewhere. The checklist is not what makes a good investor. What makes a good investor is whatever is unique about you, you're going to bring to the table, whatever judgment you have that is going to be, insightful when it comes to, startups. And again, I'm assuming that the person asking this would be earlier stage, not, jumping in doing, Series Ds. So, and so go start doing advising. If you think your unique perspective, and everyone's got one, if your unique perspective is actually going to add a bunch of value, in theory, you should be able to sell that directly to founders. In theory, you can say, hey, you know what? I'm trying to develop, sort of like a body of work that I can go use to get some money. So you can go sell that, in theory, if you were to go advise a few companies, frankly, like that's as much a demonstration of your ability to add value to entrepreneurs as anything else. It's also going to demonstrate your ability to get deal flow, which is often what people use that angel experience for, to demonstrate a deal flow capacity, people willing to let you in. In fact, I would argue you're demonstrating more by doing a little collaborative work with a founder than you are by having them, take 25K from you, right? Like, because 25K is 25K, you're not going to have a lot of, meaningful ownership. You're just on a, list somewhere, right? Whereas they only had like maybe 4 or 5 people that they brought in to help out, that
Right, and angel list, you could even put 1,000 and like have
Right.
no impact at all, right?
Zero
So
impact.
advising, I agree with you that advising is way better.
Yeah. So I think that's one way. If you have the space, the capacity, if you're still employed somewhere else, if you're allowed to do that, that's fantastic. The other way, and this is a little more work in terms of breaking down the walls, I think. But the other one is to go find your champion, go find your patron saint. Go find your Elon Musk. Go find the person who will back you, who just believes in you. So go find your Team Adeo guy. Right. And you have those people in your life. It's just really hard to know who they are sometimes. And so you'll have to step out of your own box to say, okay, who do I really respect that I think would support me? Not necessarily, dollars would be great, but even without the dollars, sort of support you in helping, get you in front of the right people, have you spend the right time at the right events. Which is, I didn't go there because I think that's kind of the obvious thing is, right? It's like, go start spending time around founders and find out what they need. Go start trying to spend time around some of the LPs if you can find them, because apparently it's like going on a snipe hunt to go find LPs.
Oh, and there's so many cheese balls in the LP world. There's this thing that's like the LP collective, and it's got this lion or whatever, and it's like $9,000 to join or something.
Oh
it's
my God. Yeah. Paying money up front to get, it's like usually not a good outcome.
No. With the lion. All right. So we got lots of great questions here.
The thing I would add, and I think most people wouldn't know this. So for First Round Capital was not started as, your typical 10-year fund. First Round was initially like a $3 million 1-year vehicle, right? It was a 1-year fund. It was a few $1,000,000. And that went well for Josh and Howard. And so they said, okay, we'll do that again. And it was a little more like, okay, now it's going to be like 10 million bucks, but still a 1-year fund. And so there were a series of 1-year funds, because at the time Josh was like, well, and Howard were like, I want to do this, but I'm not sure I want to do it. I haven't been an investor. Maybe I'm going to hate it. Maybe people won't want to invest in me. And so that's another thing to do, is sort of tighten up that time frame, so that you're not trying to sort of set up 10 years of work, right? You're setting up a year of work. It's an easier commitment both for you and for the people that might back you.
Okay, so this is I'm ready to get ready. Who should get into VC and who should not? Who is an ideal VC and who is a bad VC? Now, a lot of VCs, guys, have what is referred to as sharp elbows.
Yeah.
And that is like the modern day venture capitalists. They're like, oh yeah, hey, how are you? But in the background, they're like,
sharp elbows.
Sharp, yeah. So I'd love to who should get into VC, who should not get into VC, who's a good VC,
Right.
Who's a bad VC.
Yeah, and I certainly won't name, although I tend to not want to name negative, because that's not constructive for anyone. But I put a few names up there. I said some nice things earlier. So I think that who should get into VC? I think that if you are a good enabler of people, if you help people do better at the things they're trying to do, you should be in VC, right? You should be in VC. If you are trying to squeeze for money, get the hell out. You do not belong here. There are many public markets happy to take you, hedge funds happy to take you. That is a great outcome. Find your people. But of course, every so often the Redditors might come after you, a little GameStop action, but that's part of the game. So, but yeah, I think being a good enabler of people is incredibly important, especially, again, I think earlier stage, that's more important. I think as a company gets bigger, you start needing other things, and being a good connector will become more important, right? Being a good, sort of sounding board becomes, because there is a difference between being an enabler and being a sounding board, right? So there's this, and again, if you're anyone in here as a parent, I mean, it is like being a parent, kids need different things from you at different ages. Companies need different things, founders need different things. So the founder who kind of had it all together when it was, her and her best friend and, a couple of people, is very different from what that person's going to need when it's a team of 100, right? Or it's a team of 1,000. And now they're trying to deal with, okay, I've stepped back, there's this other CEO, how do I have, a good relationship, right? Because we got the expansion person in. And I just really want to make stuff. And you get that a lot, where people just want to make stuff. They don't want to deal with the crap. So I think being a good VC is number one. You've got to start with being a good enabler of someone else's dream. And then you need to be flexible about someone's evolving needs. And so that's who belongs. I think someone else who belongs is sort of someone you have to be good at saying no when it's time to say no. Because there is a time often where you have to say no.
Well, I mean, look, can I just double click on that as well? Sorry to cut in every once in a while. Yep. I mean, a lot of venture capital is saying no, and a lot of people who come into it are thinking, oh my God, I'm going to give money away. Well, you give money away like what, 1 in 100 to 1,000 of the times that you don't give money away, something in that ratio.
Yeah, and it's the flip side, right? On the one hand, you are the enabler of dreams, and on the other side, you are the destroyer and crusher of dreams. And so, and I've had, I've had days where I've come home and my partner be like, so, hey, babe, how was your day? I'm like, oh man, I crushed a lot of dreams today. It was really hard, and it's funny because I think the people who are better enablers, it hurts more to say no. And then, not just know about, hey, we're not going to fund you, this is why, but also know for someone you have backed. I think one of the hardest things I ever have had to do is saying no to someone whose company is not doing well. I backed them initially. And now, my fund is not going to write the next check for, X number of reasons. Like, hey, you know what? We did, the first note, we did the second note, we're not going to do the third note, right? And again, then that's not a unique situation for an investor to be in, where at some point you say no, and that one is not just the no of, I don't want a second date. That's the no of, no, I don't want to, have more kids with you, and I want a divorce, right? Like that's.
Yeah, that's like, yeah, exactly. Great.
Right. Analogy, I still love you. You're still a good person, but this isn't working. You need to be doing something else. And so
no, and that's important for people to hear, that like a lot of times they come in with these rose-colored glasses and they don't realize that it's not so easy a job.
Yeah,
right?
and it's hard. And again, it's hard for them and for you to know, at what point are you supposed to be beating your head on the wall because it's going to break, and at what point are you just bloodying yourself and it's not going to break, right? You've got to walk around the wall or go do something else. And so I think being able to have that judgment, which is not just about, a deal judgment for that first check, it's also sort of that judgment ongoing, like when is enough?
So there's a lot of questions coming up. I'm going to try and burn through some more quickly. A couple questions relating to solo GP from Chris. Is it a disadvantage or difficult to raise as a solo GP? And, what are some of the average fund sizes you've seen as a solo GP? I'd love your thoughts on that. Happy to also contribute if you want.
Oh yeah, well, and you probably, and frankly, Adeo probably has a more, more well-informed view because you're actually in the business of spinning out funds. But sitting, from this side, I can tell you that being a solo GP, you're essentially a sole founder. So anything that, whatever your opinion is of being a sole founder, like, there are parts about that are harder. There are parts that are easier. Can you go faster? Yes. In certain ways, you can make decisions faster. You consult yourself, like, okay, you good? Yeah, you good? Okay, we're done. Right. So you can go a bit faster in that way. It's only you.
What happens if you disagree?
That's a problem. And that's a problem. I think we've all had that problem from time to time. So having no one else to share the workload with, the same issues with investors, it's just LPs instead of angels or whatever, right? Which is who's going to do the work if you get sick, right? Is it gone if you get hit by the bus? That kind of thing is like this risk with a sole founder. You never get a break. Like if there's someone else and, you can actually take a vacation for a few days, like just you can close your eyes and sleep because someone else can still be working. So I think it's all the same challenges and benefits. You don't get the benefit of having, sort of that team rapport, when things are hard. Or when things are going well, to sort of, because usually if things go well, you can't handle the workload. So having someone to do that with. And I think that translates, I think, on the other side, right? Like there are people who fund sole founders and there are people who don't. So for StartX, when people come in to get interviewed, we give a pretty hard time to the sole founders. Almost always the first thing I ask a sole founder is, why don't you have a co-founder? And get the answer back. And if the answer even remotely smells like because I don't share well, they're not going to get into StartX. No one in that room wants them. They're not going to be good for the community. So, what you want to hear is like, yes, I would love to share the work. Yes, I would love to find the right person, but it's important to me that it's a good fit. And so, I haven't been able to spend the right time, or this is what I'm looking for. And I'd love introductions. So there are ways to manage through that, but, be honest with yourself about if you don't have a fellow partner, like, why don't you have one? What is the going forward plan to someday have one, or will you never have one? And be very clear so that you don't waste your time with investors that won't back it. And so that the ones that do, you can just get, again, focus is great.
Everything you just said, I agree with 100%. I'll add a couple quick little tidbits on that. So quick tidbits. You can use venture partners to bolster some team rank on a solo GP fund, and maybe some of those venture partners prove to be very, very good, and you can bring them on as a partner later on. And then second, in terms of fund size, I like to say that, and this is something we found very true, if there's a number of money that you can raise very easily, multiply that by 10, and that's your ideal fund size. So if you could go out there and raise $500,000 really easily, then your first fund size might be 5 million. If you can raise $1 million very easily, then your first fund size might be 10. So now for disadvantaged founders, maybe that number is 0. And there's lots of questions about that, Christine. So like, let's say you are a minority or you don't have the network and you want to get into venture capital to help, let's say, peers in your group succeed. What are your thoughts about how someone from a disenfranchised minority, or which could in some places be women, in some places be people of color, it differs around the world. Any thoughts on how they might get started in the field?
Yeah. So I think one of the first things is just start doing things like this, right? Because you don't have to already have a bunch of, connections just to start learning, right? If it's something you might be interested in. So you can follow people on social media. You can start conversations on social media. I know that most of the successful things I've had, just, someone getting to know me. I know I react really well when someone comes to me and they've got an interesting perspective. They have something to say. And so it is possible for you to develop something to say with 0 connections, right? So develop a point of view. And if it's a point of view about, diversity, for example, then there's a whole bunch of investors that do invest effort into, diversity thematically. Go chat them up and say, hey, this is something I've noticed, what do you think? Or, hey, here's some more information. I saw you were talking about, you might find this, something good to know about. So develop those points of view. If you can write, it definitely helps to write, either in thread formats or,
To be
post.
fair, I think Twitter is not writing.
No, it's not.
So 140
Although
characters.
it does take there is a certain skill set. I found it.
Oh my God, I don't have it, by the way, and I know
Yeah,
what you mean because I am
those
like
people,
Twitter and that.
yes, like the ones who can do like, it's like, 100 tweet thread, and like people are just going through every one, like that is a real writing talent, I would argue. There's a fascinating article in the Times about the movie is coming out, Nola, about the woman who did like the sex trafficking long string of tweets about going to Florida. I don't know. Anyway, you have to see it if you haven't seen it. But yeah, so I'd say, basically have something to offer, right? And you can develop something to offer, whether it's a packaging up of your experience, whether it's a point of view on, something you're paying attention to or something you find interesting. Because believe me, if you come across as smart, different point of view, and you look like you're useful, people will spend time with you. People are gonna
Well, that's beautiful though. What you're saying is now like just become what you want to be in the world, right? And start on social. That gets you the network with founders that will hopefully then build your network with potential investors. And then you can start, creating the version of yourself that you want to be online, and then actually turn yourself into that version in the real world by then taking your online network and converting it to advisory positions and limited partner investments. That's a beautiful strategy. Sorry to interrupt. Any other thoughts? There's tons of other questions I want to
Yeah,
chat
no,
about.
I mean, the only thing I'd say is, as I'm queen of the metaphors, is like, sort of imagine you have a grappling hook, and it's like, Mission Impossible or whatever, right? And you're swinging that thing, and you're gonna latch onto something and yank, right, to get yourself up. You decide what you're gonna yank onto, right? I threw out some ideas, and it might be going to school, right? Like, I am from the hillbilly part of Florida, and somehow got myself into a good college, and that was a yank, right? Like, okay, yank. Do I do any networking with anyone I went to school now? No. I went to Columbia, New York. Oh my, amazing experience, definitely life-changing. Third class, I had women in it. And but that doesn't mean that I use those people now. They are not part of Silicon Valley investment community. Like, I sold friends, but like, they're not part of my professional life so much. But it was a yank, right? And so, again, don't be afraid to just like yank on whatever is going to get you up to that next level.
Yeah, okay, I love that, and I love the analogy of the grappling hook. Okay, so many interesting questions, guys. I like this one though. So how do you marry investing in a sector you don't have much knowledge in or understanding with being inclusive? It's a fascinating, I'll be quiet because fascinating question.
Yeah. Well, and actually it's funny, I can't believe I didn't say this before, but so one of the best qualities about a venture capitalist is someone who's curious, right? If you're not curious, you will be a shitty VC if you're not curious. Because that curiosity is not just going to take you to like, ooh, it's this. Like, you get to follow a fascination and learn about something new again and again, and that's so cool. But it's also going to help you find problems. It's sort of like, oh, I'm curious about that. What's that? Right? So you'll find both good things and bad things if you follow that curiosity. So anyway, so I think that curiosity is going to drive you to learn about the thing. So if something kind of teases your interest, and all of a sudden it's like 2 a.m. and you're like, oh my gosh, why am I still reading, posts and articles about, this thing that's cool? Like, I need to go get myself some sleep. That's how that's a good thing for you to be spending time on. It doesn't matter where you came from. And that's why, I think one of the sort of under-recognized things about venture in general is that it does not take long to become an expert in a new space in venture capital, because everything is new all the time. So if you like go look at AI from 10 years ago, you didn't have a bunch of AI investors running around. There weren't any. And then all of a sudden you start to see it showing up, and then now people are starting to do it, and the first book comes out from O'Reilly, and all this stuff, right? And with those breadcrumbs, if you come in when early breadcrumbs are showing up on a subject and you just sort of like are idly reading stuff and find it fascinating, like, you have an opportunity to become the expert in that thing. Do not.
Well, right, because a lot of times you're also being pitched by the founders who are on the cutting edge of the field that doesn't exist yet, 100%. Right?
And that is the one caution I would put out, because I know there are people who, you'll go and you'll start a fund. You say, okay, this is going to be the, the Bitcoin fund, or, whatever it's going to be, right? Where's my carve out, right? Where's my carve out space, so that those new fascinations have some space to come in? Because eventually, the new thing is the old thing. And if you're going to be in venture, you have to constantly be making space for the new thing. Right? So
can I ask on that? I remember I was at a table with like all these famous people, like Elon Musk, all this stuff. It was at an event. And these guys were talking about crypto. And this is a long time ago. This is when Bitcoin was like $1 or whatever, literally $1. Yeah. And they're like, so it's this thing, and and we're all like, we're like literally like, ah. So and then we realized that two of the people at the table were trying to hustle us to buy Bitcoin, and then we were just like, so wait, and we're being hustled. So we just were laughing uncontrollably, and now it's whatever, almost $40,000 a coin. So how do you suspend your disbelief in some of these things that sound crazy?
Yeah. Well, part of it just goes to being a kind person. So, which is, no matter what kind of cockamamie story someone has like started telling you, again, go be a parent again and say, okay, someone is so excited about the ugliest baby I have ever freaking seen. Do you say it's an ugly baby? No, you never say your baby's ugly. It's always like, oh, it's so sweet. And you find some random thing about that baby to compliment, right? Oh, I love the little curl in its hair. That's all the parent needs to hear. They're so happy. Like, oh, yes, I know, it's wonderful. So find something to compliment. But as you start to see more of those babies, you're like, well, maybe that's not an ugly baby. Maybe that's just the new baby. That's just what everyone's starting to look like, right? Because there's a difference between that one crazy dude trying to sell you Bitcoin at dinner, and, over time, it's like, okay, I had like 2 or 3 people come in talking about this, sector. And now this month I had this many, and now I've got like 100 coming over my email. What the heck is going on? Like, I need to pay some attention, right? So, and that's one of the reasons I really, really like being involved with the student accelerator programs is, as you noted,
you get to see very early all the crazy stuff.
I make my little secret cheat sheet as a judge, right? Is I take the liberty of starting a Venn diagram, like just on paper, right? Keeping my Venn diagram of like, what am I hearing? Where are the overlap spaces? And so I'll go beat my brains on, the interview wall, and we'll go meet like, 45 teams in one day, and like after stack ranking. And then I'll have this beautiful Venn diagram about like, okay, I got this, and everyone's targeting that demographic. And like, I love doing that. Oh yeah.
That's really great advice, by the way. I love that. That is really great. Now, I want to get to one last question. I know we're going over, but this is such a good question. Do you have time for one last one?
Go for it.
All right. Yeah. No, I love this question. So what will make these new perspective VCs successful if the LPs have the old perspective and ideals? How do we convince LPs to take a chance on us when we're more reliant on you get the gist of the question?
I get the gist, yeah. And hence the dilemma. So you cannot force an LP to do anything. The closest way you're going to force an LP to do something is if, let's say it's a university endowment, is going to be to somehow lobby that university board to talk about where your investment's going. Again, think about it in terms of like apartheid, tobacco, all that kind of stuff. Things where there were mass changes in what investments were deemed acceptable and unacceptable. If you are prepared to go tilt at that windmill, you can do that. If you are not prepared to go tilt at that windmill, then it's going to be by basically making the bandwagon that they feel left out of, right? And so to get the bandwagon going, you need to go ground up, which is much more challenging. However, can be more accessible because you could start doing that either at a local level, like in your community, or you can do that, or with your circles, and even if you are not someone that has a bunch of relationships with sort of people who might write individual checks as an LP, which is how many of the smaller funds get started, right? As Ade was alluding to. If you're not someone with those connections, you probably will know someone with those connections, and there is no reason you can't just start doing that publicly in a social forum, or find a group, because there are groups, or are people who are working on that and amplifying those voices, or again, back to bring something unique to the table, saying, well, what can I contribute? What information can I go dig up? Or what ideas can I come up with that would be helpful to these other folks that already have a platform and are working on the challenge?
So maybe to take that into tactical advice, right? I always like to say, start with people that believe in you or believe in what you're trying to do, right? Which is exactly what you were just saying. Yeah. And then maybe you do a smaller fund with whatever you can scrounge up, prove that the model works. And then you go to the big guys and go, look, I'm making money. Mm-hmm. You're in the business of making money. Let's collaborate. And then it's an easier thing because of the job security and all the other things we spoke. I just want to say, I had goosebumps. I'm reading some of the feedback here. People are so enthused by what you said. They loved your comment about be curious and be kind. That's been circulating in the chat. That's such a beautiful and thoughtful way of looking at venture capital. And that's just, I must say that your views on venture capital are inspiring to me, Christine, and I always leave these sessions happier and feeling more right-minded about the world of venture capital. So thank you so much for joining us on this.
And thank you. You guys are doing amazing work, so I'm happy to support.
And for everyone, guys, there's tons of questions in here about VC Lab. Let me just say, we've got a session next Thursday at this time where we'll talk about those questions. And I didn't want to take Christine's time and answer them. So we will answer your questions about VC Lab this time next Thursday. Thank you very much. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, everybody. Have a beautiful day, guys.
Thank you.